Many of you who follow this channel know that I like to give featurettes an open look. And I know that perhaps not everybody does. Many people do, reactions to new types of content and different types of entertainment ventures, but not everybody covers behind the scenes stuff. I do. In particular because I like to be able to gauge the mindsets of the artist and the pursuit of the craft involved. And it gives you a deeper level of appreciation and understanding when you go to watch said content, respective to whatever that featurette is covering, whether it be in the cinematic space, in the streaming space, wherever it's placed. It gives you a deeper level of reverence if the project speaks to that level of quality. Yellowstone is that as a brand. I've spoken in high regard to it many times on this channel before, in particular because the show certainly deserves as much attention as should be, as it's capable of having. And that's what really drew me in the first place, was that high regard among fans. And I constantly heard, in advance of hopping onto the show myself, oh, Yellowstone's so great. Yellowstone's, top tier television. I'd never seen it. I'm like, why do everybody keep talking about Yellowstone? And I looked at, a bit about the show. I'm like, okay, it's a Western from Paramount. That could be interesting. Kevin Costner's in it. Kelly Riley's in it as well. Favorite of mine, actually, in Yellowstone, even more so. She's such a talented actress. But the ratings as well, that's really what brought me in initially, too, was not just the regard, but the ratings. It's not often that you see such a huge spike like what Yellowstone has experienced. But the show speaks to that, if you've watched it. And maybe you haven't. You're probably like, here's another person talking about the show. You will thank me when you watch it, especially in the mix of streaming content these days, which is in a very varied space of quality. Some shows fare well, others don't. And the feeling of reverence I have for Yellowstone is seldom felt. I've not experienced that in many streaming ventures. But with this show immediately, I did. The quality of execution, the nature scope of it is it's such an engrossing journey just to watch. The tour of Montana that you get in its natural scenic imagery is it's an experience worth relishing in itself. But the story in itself, the sophistication, the layers, the talent, the writing, and I've said, I use this word in a very limited fashion, the vision of Taylor Sheridan, who is a very capable Hollywood writer. I'm very impressed with his work. And, I've yet to check out a bunch of his other brand expansions. But he's proven to be quite a formidable presence for Paramount, so much so that they've really enveloped him as his own brand. Again, for many of his other entertainment ventures I have yet to showcase, and I will. Those are coming. But Yellowstone as a brand, I'm sure Paramount's wanted something with such prominence. So think about that, aside from Star Trek and Halo and other types of, fictional IPs, and ones that perhaps were revered at one point. I know Star Trek isn't necessarily that anymore. Paramount's, I'm sure, wanted a success. Who thought it would have been this emerging brand of, a Western from Yellowstone? And yet I'm watching this thing going, it deserves every level of respect it has. And I binged it immediately. When I got started in the first episode, I'm like, okay, I'm hooked. Go right through episode to episode to episode. It didn't take me that long to get to season 4. I haven't seen yet season 5. I got to renew my Peacock subscription, admittedly. It's still weird to me, by the way, that, most of the Yellowstone expansions, like the show I'm about to talk about more in focus, are not on the same network as the principal show. That one's separate. I still find that weird. There's probably some sort of, licensing issue for that. But it's odd. You think for Paramount, you'd want to bring subscribers in, when you carry the principal show on your platform. I don't know. Anyway, Yellowstone has proven to be such a big success and an IP for Paramount that they've expanded to many different spin-offs. 1883 as well, which I have yet to finish watching, but it's been good on what I've seen of it. 1923 is very similar, and it's a past iteration of the Dutton family through history. This time, not in the early 1880s, but the Roaring Twenties, which I'm really excited to see brought to life through the beautiful talents of Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren, acclaimed actors in their own right, and Timothy Dalton, who was recent knowledge to me that he was hopping aboard with the show. Can't wait to see him. Now, at the present, the show started airing. I'm a bit behind in covering the show, so apologies for that, but I did want to finish giving my thoughts on Yellowstone, in particular, perhaps people out there who you're looking for other streaming content to watch. And perhaps you've heard about this little show called Yellowstone on Paramount that you've heard plenty of word of, but you haven't checked out yet. I hope at some level that I can send you on the path that I experienced with Yellowstone. Again, like I said, this feeling I have with streaming content is seldom felt in my level of reverence, but I deeply respect this show. And I'm sure from what I've seen of 1923, I believe the show is going to be just as effective. But it's part of the Yellowstone family. I know it will be. But let's get a better appreciation for the craft behind this show with this featurette, bringing the 20s to life. So now we get to see, I guess, more of the historical component to the materialization of the show on a deeper level. This is really a 4-minute featurette as well. I'm excited to see more of this show in focus. I really can't wait to take a deeper look at it. Especially if maybe this featurette will entice you to look deeper, right? This level of reverence I'm sure this show is going for, it's persistent with every facet of the Yellowstone universe. Franchise is probably a better word. Everything's like termed a universe these days. I apologize. Well, the Yellowstone continuity. Let's give it a bit more of an original flair. Anyway, because I think it deserves that. It's a very unique show. I'm sure 1923 will be the same.
What an interesting era the 20s were.
The era, it's a huge character, really, in this show.
I would believe that based on the set. It's beautifully illustrated, just like Yellowstone.
We're dealing with the modernization of appliances, cars. Things are rapidly changing.
Even electricity was a new thing, and there's just so much swirling around.
It's really
Evolving
easy to
world.
believe you're in 1923 when you're out in the middle of nowhere. When you come to town, that's a little bit more difficult.
The cool thing about a period piece is you're able to completely disconnect from yourself because you're surrounded by such an amazing set.
The two are in
Every
history.
little piece of something adds to the atmosphere.
Sets and our production design were really stunningly beautiful and detailed.
Having created, bags and rifle scabbards and, gun belts.
The period ropes.
The level of devotion that goes into materializing this show and any of its properties, I'm very impressed by.
Right.
Like, there's not a facet of the world of Yellowstone that feels
look like you were in the 1920s. From
unnecessarily
the buildings to like all the
thrown
stores
in
there.
or inserted.
The way they created these
It's a
beautiful
consuming
facades
presence.
and storefronts and kiosks.
It's surreal to see all these, not only all these horses and these cowboys, but the introduction of motor vehicles. So we have all these classic cars that we're working with. They've created a world that works in 360 degrees.
We have, to the inch, the recreation of the Dutton Lodge.
There's a big set that has been constructed. There's no painting or stuff.
That's beautiful.
It's solid timbers and all that, which is magnificent.
Our costume designer, Janie, is amazing. She has sourced real vintage dresses.
Oh, isn't that neat?
And wearing those, it feels really
Yeah.
authentic.
And I couldn't
feels like
believe
history.
how
This is just beautiful.
all the
It's like a
actors
documentary
were dressed.
project.
I mean, they were head to toe, decked out in 1920s period costumes, all real vintage costumes.
So you had a mix of your farmers and all of that, but you also had big city people that were coming in from the East Coast and all of that, which are definitely more stylized.
The background actors really do kind of like set the scene and really to, recreate the time period so that the audience and the actors really feel like they're set, 100 years ago.
Yeah, it literally is 100 years ago, isn't it?
Ben is such an artist. He is a fantastic director in so many ways.
He's so tender about everything he does. He shows up to work really wanting to create art.
He will take you and gently maneuver you where you need to go, but allowing all the actors to really expand and to really play.
He makes you feel free to make bold decisions, and he doesn't judge you for them. But he's also a perfectionist, so he's always honest about what he thinks about your choices.
What's interesting in this show, we have so
That's definitely consistent with Yellowstone. Like I said, every space
kind of
feels
never know where they are,
managed.
or what's being seen, and I like that.
Organically and fittingly to materialize the entire vision.
We're talking to each other. You just kind of turn around. There's a wall of cameras right behind you, and it allows us to work really quickly.
Since day one, when he has 6 cameras up, and they're all beautiful shots, I'm always mesmerized.
We have the scripts, which are incredible. We have his costumes, which are amazing. We get to ride horses in, and we're in Montana. We just got to show up.
Wouldn't that be a work experience? Like, a beautiful one? Who doesn't watch this and immediately become engrossed with the piece of art? I mean, like I said, you might be somebody who's looking at this with fresh eyes. This featurette just embodies my feelings with the show. Although, again, this is a different subset of the Yellowstone storyline. Set about 100 years ago. I mean, that really is crazy. But it is basically like watching a historical documentary come to life. It's its own story. Of course, that's the fictional angle. It's focused on the Dutton family. But it's so drenched in history and appearance. And set in the era. Like, how can you not revere this show at all? Like, the feeling that I have in reference for Yellowstone, it's existent here. This is again, this evolving path that Paramount's going on. I'm so enchanted by. And I do hope that at some level, I'm reaching somebody with this content that perhaps is looking for a show where you want that experience of reverent television, or television which deserves that feeling. And you don't feel that in other types of facets within the streaming world. Again, it's a diverse space in regards to quality and reception. Yellowstone is a show that deserves its viewership. And you will thank me once you embark on the path. And I will definitely say that it helps to watch Yellowstone in advance. And maybe even perhaps 1883. Although, again, these shows are isolated that if you so choose, you can follow the story on its own, I would believe. But it does help to have that extra background, and you'll want to have that original foundation. Yellowstone is that engrossing of a show. You will not want to miss it. Now, I have also offered in the past, I make this statement pretty clear because I do, I maintain the perspective of, who I'm reaching out to in regards to my audience. In terms of it being like, some people might think, and this is the regard that I approach it with, I heard some people terming this as a conservative show, and I regarded that to mean perhaps in content. It's rated TVMA for a reason. Keep that in mind. Now, that's more the principal show. I don't know if 1923 is going down that path. I haven't seen an official rating for this. I would assume probably. But keep that rating in mind before you embark on the show. Maybe reading some of the content reviews to understand what you're in for. There is, I will be very clear on this, it's kind of unnecessary. There is some nudity to the show. I don't tend to prefer to see that myself. It's used sparingly, and it is avoidable for the most part. But if you want to follow down the story, you will thank me. And probably every other Yellowstone viewer that you've heard reference the reverence they have for the show. The ratings speak to the mastery of craft that I truly believe Taylor Sheridan is gifted with. His show, just anything he's done thus far that I've watched, has impressed me. 1883, from what I've seen of it, is also treated very well, and I would believe in 1923 is the same. 100 years ago, this is set back in history. And who doesn't love, humor and a realization of history to the best extent possible? So much so that every piece of clothing, like when they said they got vintage fabrics, like Paramount went all out on this IP, and they still are doing it. I mean, this isn't necessarily as easy of a show to translate because it does have that historical realism. Versus, let's say, for example, maybe another spinoff that's coming, for example, the 4 Sixes, right? That the spinoff to Yellowstone set in the present day with the Jimmy character that's in the Texas ranch. That one is easier to realize because it's in present day, right? Those conveniences of technology and circumstances and components of a show and the story you want to tell, those are readily available. Versus a show like this, it has to be constructed in the past. But isn't it just beautifully realized? And again, the talent alone, Helen Mirren, Harrison Ford, Timothy Dalton. Enough there to bring in any newbie, I'm sure. And I've also studied it in the past in 1923. I do wonder, perhaps for those of us who are looking at Indiana Jones with skeptical eyes, again, being another very popular Western-esque brand, Western adventure show, or movie, if what we've heard about the new one is true, if 1923 is an inadvertent, satisfying escape, right, to a show that perhaps treats an Indiana Jones-esque character set in the Western scene. I mean, I know probably the patriarch of who Harrison Ford is playing here is very different, but in energy it does feel slightly similar, right? It's a Western-themed show, and in some parts it does have a bit of a consistent energy to it, although Indiana Jones is much more intense. Yellowstone is too. It's different. It's a bit more subtle, but it's still, it's equally as intense. I do wonder if this is a nice escape for some of us who perhaps have seen some of the rumors that have posed some merit based on some articulation from other outlets. And maybe where we feel dissatisfied at that release, we have 1923 to turn to as a satisfying Western show. Disney loses perhaps some appreciation to Paramount. Isn't that funny? But 1923 and really anything Yellowstone adjacent absolutely deserves it, in my opinion. Yellowstone has been an absolute treat. Again, having binged all 4 seasons and having yet to watch the 5th one, but believing it's good. I've heard from people that I know who have watched it that it's really good. They haven't told me spoilers yet, so I'm going in completely uninformed. I'm very happy about that. But what I've seen of 1923, I'm captivated by. As somebody who loves documentaries as well, I love that idea of seeing a project that fits both fictional and historical, but enough that you kind of it transcends boundary lines, and it feels like a real piece of history. Yellowstone really is just such an incredibly dynamic brand, and I'm happy to see Paramount go all in with it. What are your guys' thoughts with 1923? And maybe you're somebody, again, I'd love to hear the angle you come from where we've seen some of the show and the continuity of the other stories, or if you're coming at this with fresh eyes. Let me know what you feel down below. And what your opinion is in 1923, if this featurette alone makes you want to watch the series. I have such a deep respect for Yellowstone as a brand, and this featurette only builds it. 1923 as a show just looks incredible. I'm really happy, like I did with 1883 as well, although I haven't finished it yet. I am really happy to keep venturing down the rabbit hole. It is such a strong IP in Yellowstone, and one that I never thought would have this level of reference, and this is when I started. But yet, the minute I began with it, I've never forgotten about the show. I'm sure, just like the principal program, this is based on 1923, will be the same. Thank you so much for watching this video. Before you bounce, feel free to drop a like and comment, subscribe to this channel with a ding on the bell, and share this video with your friends. And consider checking out the description here. There you'll find links to my other channels, as well as addresses to my other social media accounts and ways you can help support my work if you feel so inclined. May God bless you, and looking forward to when our paths cross again.